we're ready to go. Good to go. All right, welcome everybody to the latest stop on the national tour of the Free Assange campaign. For more information on this, AssangeDefense.org is the place to go. I want to start out talking really briefly about the latest potentially explosive news development in this case, and then we're going to hear from Gabriel Shipton, Julian Assange's brother, John Shipton, Julian Assange's father, and an academic. No, one of the towering intellectual figures of our time, Dr. Cornel West, will also be sharing some thoughts with us. But so the news over the weekend, if folks hadn't seen it, is that a young man named Siggy Thedarson, who had been a central witness that the Department of Justice is using against Assange, told reputable press in Iceland that he lied to the FBI, and it appears also that the FBI lied to Iceland as part of its effort to extradite Assange. And why this revelation is so important is because of what exactly he was saying. So Assange is effectively being prosecuted here for publishing evidence of war crimes. But because of our remaining reverence for the First Amendment here in the United States, the Department of Justice can't just come out and say that he's being prosecuted for publishing evidence of war crimes, because then you have to prosecute the New York Times, you have to prosecute the Intercept, you have to prosecute the Washington Post, you have to prosecute all of media that publishes classified information. They don't want to do that. So they want to say, no. In fact, he's actually a hacker. So he's working with hackers, and he's hacking into classified systems, and he's extracting information. So a key piece of evidence they had was a witness from Iceland who said that Assange was directing hackers in Iceland to hack into the Bank of Iceland and otherwise kind of operating this hacker syndicate. That turns out, as many people knew already, but now he's confirming on the record, not to be true. That was a lie. Now, the reason they needed this claim in their indictment, even though he's not being charged with those particular crimes, is that it buttresses what they're trying to say about his relationship with his source, Chelsea Manning. What they're trying to say is that it wasn't that Chelsea Manning, based on her conscience, leaked information about war crimes to Julian Assange, and he, as his role as a publisher and a journalist, published them. No, in fact, what they're trying to say is that there was a hacking conspiracy here. And they back it up with this evidence from Iceland. So with that gone, all they have is the relationship between Manning and Assange. And when you look closely at it, you see a source and journalist relationship. And you, in fact, in the chat logs that have been released, you see Assange being rather careful to make sure that he's not soliciting any specific information from Manning. There's even one quote where he says, something like, you might remember the exact quote, but something like, "Curious eyes are always interested in more information that the public ought to learn about." So he's very careful never to say, go look in this particular file for this particular information. The only thing he does is help Manning with confidentiality and source protection. And the Department of Justice has tried to flip that into some sort of a hacking charge, when if you step back, Bob Woodward, when he's working with Deep Throat and telling him, we're going to put the plants on this side of the door, and that's your signal to me that you have information, then we'll meet in the parking garage. That's the same. That's functionally the same thing that Assange was helping Manning with, trying to make sure that the source could leak information and retain anonymity. Washington Post, the New York Times do that every single day. There's nothing wrong with that. I would also argue there's nothing wrong constitutionally with leaking, that there's no classification exception in the First Amendment. That's a separate question that we could talk about later if we have time. But with Siggy Thedarson's new allegation or new admission that he lied to the FBI, the case is falling apart. And so the only case they're left with is that they're prosecuting a publisher for publishing information that the U.S. did not want to be published. Gabriel, if we could start with you, I'm curious to know, how has the tour been going so far? What's the reception been like around the country?
Yeah, so the tour, it's been absolutely incredible. The receptions that we've been getting across the country, the outpouring of support, and this sort of, upwelling of people who've been coming out, to talk to us about how this case, why they care about this case, why they care about the press freedom implications, the dangers to press freedom that this case represents, and why they care about their First Amendment rights. We've literally spoken. I was just telling Cornel before. We've literally spoken to thousands of people across the country. So we started off in Miami, and each section some have different interests. Like we started off in Miami at the Bitcoin conference, and it's primarily technologists, people who are really interested in a free internet and how this case constrains internet freedom. We moved on to Boston, where Julian was awarded. We received a Sacco Vanzetti Award on Julian's behalf. New York, we stopped in New York, and we had to expand the capacity of the venue 3 times to just. That was the amount of people that wanted to come down and just hear about this case and get updated and find out more about this case. And in New York, Roger Waters, this Roger Waters ended up going viral. He called, he had a deal from Instagram for use of his song, and he basically tore it up at the event, called Mark Zuckerberg a prick, and then that went totally viral online, over 1 million hits, and that feeds into this, Julian, who saw the internet as for its emancipatory value, whereas the other side that sees it as a tool of control or a tool of how to make money from people. Then we came to Washington after that, where we stopped at the Jefferson Memorial, and one thing that really struck us there was a quote from Jefferson, which I'll read. He says, "Were it left to him to have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, he would choose the latter." So that was I'd never heard that quote before, but on that we sort of headed west down to Columbus, Chicago. Chicago, we marched through the streets with about 70 people, cheering for Julian and a free press. Denver, we went over to Denver. What was surprising about Denver is that it was so many young people there, very active activists, all interested solely in their First Amendment rights. Places like Minneapolis and St. Paul, we had a huge turnout. The people there very interested in, very anti-war, very interested in transparency, specifically military transparency. And then we went on to Oakland, which was a huge event. But everywhere we went, we were always just blown away by the outpouring of support that we saw. And as we moved across the country, the media interest increased. There's 30 plus articles out there at the moment, some even in mainstream media. We were able to do Amy Goodman's show. We were able to do Tucker Carlson's show. A couple of days ago, we were on Mehdi Hasan's show. So the media interest has just sort of developed out of this tour. And it's one thing I keep saying is that it's this issue is not a left or right issue. Amy Goodman and Tucker Carlson agree that this prosecution is a danger to press freedom, and there aren't many issues that they can agree on. I think you would know that. But yeah, so then we're just sort of rolling on. We do radio shows wherever we go. Local radio is always interested in talking to us. It's just it's been incredible. Just absolutely blown away by the people of the US, particularly. Before coming here, a lot of the persecution of Julian sort of originates from here, which is why we've come here, because this is where the decisions are made. But you sort of, I had this impression that maybe we would have some trouble. People might abuse us, or we might get arrested, or we didn't know what would happen, and it's been the exact opposite. We've come here, the hospitality has been incredible, and the people are amazing, and every day we're just surprised about how much Americans care about their First Amendment, their democratic rights, and even about Julian Assange.
And John, has any of this momentum translated into anything tangible from the administration? Joe Biden, I think, famously called him a high-tech terrorist or something a long time ago. And secondly, when was the last time you had any communication with Julian? And can you talk about how he's doing personally?
We were here in January, had some communication with part of the Biden administration. They asked us to wait till after the inauguration, but since the inauguration, as you can see, there's been a turmoil of demands upon the administration, and consequently I don't think we would be rewarded by making approaches. Our feeling, and it's demonstrated by the phenomenon, what we call an upwelling of support. Our feeling is that it begins with people, and the concerns of the people rise up, and the Congress people and the administration take note. That's particularly in our case because this is a worldwide phenomenon. In the Western world, we travel every country, and there is support there. In each country, with the exception of New Zealand, there's a cross-party group in their parliament supporting Julian Assange. So that's Spain, France, in particular Germany, Australia is quite big in Australia, and the United Kingdom. Yesterday, on behalf of the 21 members of the cross-party group, 3 MPs went out to Belmarsh prison in a protest and delivered a letter to the governor because parliamentarians have been unable to get access to the jail to see Julian. That's that. The second part of your question is that Julian has permission to ring externally international calls as long as his account is in credit. Since the jail was fully locked down about a year ago, he rings me for 10 minutes each day and then it's guillotined. He would like to ring more, sometimes he does, but it depends upon the availability of access, because there are 800 prisoners there, all of them wishing to use the telephone to ring their loved ones or their lawyers or whatever.
And Dr. West, could you put the prosecution of Assange into some context for us, with the goal of giving people some sense of how he can actually be freed through public pressure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me first say that it is a blessing, honor, and privilege to sit here with my dear brother Gabriel and brother John, who are biologically and lovingly connected to my very dear brother Julian. I have a deep love and respect for him. I had dialogue with him when he was there in the embassy of Ecuador back 8 years ago. And we appreciate the work that you've done with Intercept and others, Brother Ryan, and the great Jeremy Scahill. I understand the plight and predicament of Brother Julian Assange as part of the legacy of all the great journalists who tried to raise their courageous voices and vision in the face of forms of terrorism. That Ida B. Wells Barnett, one of the great journalist, black woman dealing with American terrorism at home. Her works on lynching. Seymour Hersh, I.F. Stone, again, Jeremy Scahill, trying to tell the truth about American lies and crimes. That is a tradition that my dear brother Julian Assange is a part of. And one of the reasons why I would not miss this moment of not just being in solidarity with him and Brother John and Julian, but also raising my voice, is to accent the degree to which the vision, courage, the willingness to serve and sacrifice in the name of being a truth seeker and a justice witnesser. That's what Brother Julian is. And one of the reasons why the various administrations, be it Obama, be it Trump, be it Biden, have yet to fully come to terms with who he is and what his witness is all about, is an attempt to try to hide and conceal the American imperial crimes based on the lies told. And we know that every nation, every government, every empire tells lies to conceal its crimes. And therefore, we have to be in genuine solidarity based on a moral consistency. And myself, as a revolutionary Christian, part of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., is a spiritual constancy to accent those who have been victimized by American terrorism and crimes through drones and a variety of other mechanisms. And so anytime I get a chance to say a word for my brother Julian, on television, radio, with the Father or the Son or the journalist, I come running. And so I was blessed to drive down from New York. We're driving right back to New York. My dear wife, to be honest, Hiti and I driving back with smiles on our faces to be a part of this. And I do want to point out Brother Randy Credico, who was unique in the culture, the legacy of the Richard Pryors and the George Carlins, who as activists, and we've been in jail together on many occasions with a smile singing together, concerned with the kinds of things that Brother Julian is concerned about. And what is that? The ability of those Franz Fanon called the wretched of the earth to live lives of dignity and decency. And that truth ought to resonate no matter how many of the mainstream press show up, no matter how many politicians show up, because truth crushed to earth will rise again. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. Not just Brother Julian's suffering, but the suffering of those who have been killed, murdered, brutalized by American terrorism here, be it in Ferguson or abroad, be it as victims of U.S. drones. And that's what we're talking about. That's why this is a life and death issue. That is why it's an issue of press freedom. And in the end, it is an issue of trying to preserve the conditions for the possibility of democracies here and abroad. That's what's at stake here. And it's never a matter of numbers and quantity. It's a matter of the quality of the issues raised. That's what's at stake when we talk about my dear brother, Julian Assange.
And so, arrayed against the principle that you're talking about, and I like that you mentioned the concept of moral consistency.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to get everybody's response to this, because Gabriel, when we spoke last in Washington several weeks ago, there were several people in the audience who said, you know, I'm with you and I'm with this cause. Whenever I try to spread it, I get pushback from my normie Democratic friends who are still bitter about 2016 and the email leaks. And for one, everybody should know, if it matters, that has nothing to do with these charges. Like he has not been charged related to anything in 2016. Separately, a journalist's job, if they get a leak, is to authenticate it and publish it. If it comes from a hack, if it comes from a conscience-driven leaker, that's not the point. The point is the information valuable to the public? And if it is, the public ought to have a right to review it. But the question of moral consistency comes in, because as soon as the principle becomes hard to defend, and as soon as there's a person that you're still angry at over a 2016 grievance, you see people start to shrink away from the principle. Have you confronted much of that on the road, and what have you found as a way to get through to people that the principle is far more important than your small grievance here?
Yeah, we haven't confronted that a lot, as much as we expected we would, and when we do, it is about the Chelsea Manning leaks and the publication of those leaks, and it's about explaining to people that that's what it's about. It's not about that's what Julian's been prosecuted for. That's what this dangerous precedent is being set, is about those leaks. It's not about anything else. And I think this is a real problem, that people feel that they can, excuse this prosecution that is the first of its kind against a publisher because they might disagree with, or have a disagreement with that person. So I think it's really important to talk to these people and say, this is the first time that this has ever been done to a publisher, and how it affects people, not just here, but around the world. So people in other countries, journalists in other countries where they don't have the same rights that they do here or in Australia or Britain, journalists who live in totalitarian states or authoritarian states, how this prosecution and persecution of Julian Assange affects them is when the United States goes and talks, or the State Department goes and confronts, say, the China about their human rights record and their press freedoms, and China says to them, well, who are you to lecture us? Look what you're doing to Julian Assange. If the UK, the Russian ambassador to the UK, was confronted about the treatment of Navalny, and he was able to turn around and say, you can't lecture us. Down the road you've got a publisher and a journalist locked in prison for publishing. And then another example is Aliyev, who's the dictator of Azerbaijan, been interviewed by the BBC, confronted about his record on torturing journalists, jailing journalists, killing journalists. He was able to turn around to the BBC and said, who are you to lecture me? Look what you're doing to Julian Assange. You're claiming moral superiority over us, but you're doing the exact same thing to a publisher and a journalist. So I think it's very important to realise that it doesn't just affect people here in the US or West or Australia or the UK, but it affects people who have a lot less rights and freedoms than we do. And I think that message for me, really takes it out of that local, that sort of local political message, and puts it on a broader scale that people can understand that if the Biden administration were to end this prosecution, the sort of message that it would send to these people, that they would be able to reclaim that moral high ground and be able to, put pressure on them once again without, the Assange problem that they have. So I think, thinking about those people in those countries who have a lot less rights than Australia or here in the States, I think that's very important.
Well, the collateral murder video was released here in this room, First Amendment room, by Julian Assange. Julian's birthday's next week. He'll be 50. Since that day, the persecution, deluge of malice has continued like a Niagara Falls until, as was just mentioned, Thordarson put up his hand to a criminal conspiracy he entered into with the FBI, 9 FBI officers, until eventually in Iceland, in Reykjavik, the appropriate minister of government in Iceland ordered the FBI to withdraw, realising what was being done. This was disgrace brought upon the Department of Justice, indelible upon the administration of justice in the United States by William Barr and the Trump administration. Indelible. Railroading an innocent man, getting a paedophile, convicted fraudster, thief, bribing him and flattering this damaged human being in order to bear witness, because they realised that their case under the first indictment was just falling away, falling to bits. So they issued a superseding indictment, a second indictment, in July 20th, 6 weeks before the hearing. The defence found out about this matter in the newspapers. But still, the show trial continued and brought disgrace upon the administration of justice in the United Kingdom. The judge, Baritza, knowing, quoted the Thordarson evidence, quoted it in her summary. Both sides knew that it was rubbish and that this man was damaged. The defence submitted an affidavit that they didn't have time, that Julian was inaccessible because of the COVID lockdown. They needed more time. The judge refused. The judge agreed with every single aspect of the United States submission, despite the fact of the First Amendment and despite the fact that the treaty obligations for extradition between the United States and the United Kingdom states specifically that there will be no extraditions for political matters. As a consequence, they cooked up this damaged human being in just disgrace. They brought disgrace upon themselves and their society, the United States. Disgrace, indelible. Equally, the magistrates of the Magistrates' Court, Arbuthnot, saying that Julian ought to go out and get a bit of sunshine on the balcony. He's fond of going out there to speak. He can go and sunbathe. The callousness of these people. How do they get jobs to judge people? Judge Taylor said Julian's a narcissist. Julian had just been 3 hours before that dragged out of the embassy by 6 policemen, despite the fact that Julian was an asylee. Oh dear. And it goes on. Said that Julian's a narcissist. I thought that such a man, it's a lady, Judge Taylor, such a woman would have a law degree, not a degree in psychology. She'd only seen Julian for 5 minutes. Julian had to correct her in her summing, where she declared that the charges, she said, the charges from There were no charges, there were allegations. Julian had to correct her in court. The inaccuracy, the gall, the disgrace these people bring upon themselves. Anyway, the moral imprimatur. Julian has now spent, well, moving to the 12th and 13th year of arbitrary detention. Arbitrary detention declared by the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, 2017, subsidiary report to February 2018. The 2018 report used even firmer language because the United Kingdom had appealed against the decision and their decision had failed. They took no notice. Judge Arbuthnot said, I don't take any notice of them. Trashing the United Nations. That's the greatest civil accomplishment of the post-war period, the United Nations, wherein nations can, amongst themselves, sort out their differences through negotiation, and allocate their interests in the best way possible, because states naturally compete. The United Nations Rapporteur on Torture, Professor Nils Melzer, Professor of Law at Glasgow, International Law at Glasgow University, made his 36-page report after seeing Julian for 4 hours with 2 experts on psychological torture, published the report that Julian had undergone years of psychological torture, mobbing, calumnies, lies, smears, an endless deluge from judicial officers, from newspapers, from executives of government, to the extent that one newspaper published that Julian had had a visitor. It just simply wasn't true. It just wasn't true, this particular visitor, but it had an important reverberation into the United States because of the concerns over 2016. It's just a lie. The second most surveilled person in the world, Julian Assange, after the President of the United States, easily demonstrate the proof, but they can't, of course. They can't. On it goes. Until the other day, again, as we all repeat here, until the other day, it revealed that they get a damaged human being because their case is in trouble and they bring disgrace upon themselves. That's a moral question, as Cornel says. The moral question is continuous. 13 years it'll be. 50th birthday next week. Anyway, I'm starting to rant a bit. You'll forgive me that there's a lot more that I can offer you in this ongoing. One thing. In 1200, the Magna Carta came about. The barons said, we're not having any more of this. There's got to be laws. As a consequence of that, grown up in the Western societies and other societies copying this wonderful civic gift of the English, that there had to be a law between the sovereign and the people, and the sovereign obeys the law as well as the people. In 1793, in the Enlightenment period, the Constitution of the United States understood this and brought about a wonderful thing we call the First Amendment, based upon the understanding implicit in the First Amendment is that there's only one road to freedom, and that's knowledge. This golden You know, to get gold in human affairs, you've got to grind up a lot of ore, and you get a fleck. And the First Amendment being one and the Bill of Rights being another, the Magna Carta being another. You've got to grind up so much. The Conventions of Asylum, another. The United Nations, another. Thousands of years of experiment go by, and these flecks of gold accumulate. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Eleanor Roosevelt, the first president of the United Nations, Herbert There Ever, as an Australian. They trashed the lot in Julian Assange's case. They declare wars on Iraq, or they destroy Iraq. They trash all of the treasures that guarantee us that there will be some negotiation and moral imprimatur, some gift that we can give to each other that holds us within a bound whereby we don't embark upon murderous escapades and millions die. And according to Brown University, 37 million people wander the earth seeking refuge for the 20 years destruction in the Middle East. Anyway, I thank you for listening.
And Dr. West, how do you respond to that point and the question of how do you reach people who will stipulate a principle of free expression, free speech, free press, but shrink from it in cases where it's inconvenient for them in that moment?
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say I'm just so deeply moved by my brother, because he speaks with power and eloquence, as does Brother Gabriel. And July 3rd is a very special birthday, because it's the birthday both of my dear brother Julian Assange in 1971 and that of my beloved mother, who just died just a few days ago, July 3rd, 1932. And Mom was an exemplar of what Jane Austen called constancy. She wasn't pure or pristine, but she was a woman of great moral consistency, and that's where I come from. And so when I hear people say, if the New York Times had done it, then the First Amendment protects them. But when my dear brother Julian Assange does it, and WikiLeaks does it, it doesn't protect them. That's a hound of hell. That's hypocrisy. I learned that from Irene B. West on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California, coming out of Shiloh Baptist Church in the West family. And I have no monopoly on truth or goodness or beauty. You could look at me and see that. Lies. But their lies, their hypocrisy is mendacity, and it hides criminality. I learned that from Irene B. West. And so when I see Brother Julian concerned about the lies and the crimes, and I see when he reveals it, he's not protected. But when New York Times and Washington Post and others cooperate with it, they are protected. And that's the only reason why the Obama administration tried to bring my dear brother into incarceration in the name of the Espionage Act. But when it came to their friends in the New York Times, they began to pull back. That's moral inconsistency and hypocrisy of the highest level. We are not here to assess or evaluate the character, full-fledged character of Brother Julian. He's like me. He's a cracked vessel. He's a human being. But when it comes to vision, when it comes to courage, when it comes to the willingness to expose lies and crimes, I am in deep solidarity with my dear brother Julian. And that's why we drove down from New York today and driving back tonight. with smiles on our faces, and we will celebrate both birthdays on Friday. Julian, 50, Mom, now gone, would have been 89.
And I think it's important to add to that for people who are still not persuaded that governments, when they're trying to roll back powers that people have accumulated to themselves, are always going to try to find the case that they think they can move on.
That's right.
They're not moving on the columnist for the New York Times who was popular around the country. And so you have to be on guard for that, because you have to know that it's going to be those more difficult questions. Not difficult questions for most people here, but we have to understand that there's an entire country out there. So you have to understand that when those questions are most difficult, that's when you have to have the courage to say, no, this violates the principle. Does not mean whatever you're going to say that it means of me, but it violates the principle, and we have to stand up against that. Otherwise, the precedent is set, the government has done its job of encroaching and pushing back, and the next time they're going to push back a little further. They always are going to make that same play. And so, Gabriel, and after this, if there are any questions in the audience, happy to take some. Gabriel, what in particular are you asking people to do who want to be involved?
I just want to, can I just say something before we get started?
Of course.
Just John mentioned the significance of this location. It was April 10, 2010 when Julian was here. I don't know if any of you remember it. He wore a...
I was here in the room, and this was, and literally this room. We're talking. We're not saying here in Washington, like right here.
Yeah, in this room. So he was here. April 10th, 2010, and he showed the collateral murder video, which showed a helicopter gunship that killed, gunned down Reuters journalists, and then gunned down the people who came to save their lives. But since that day, almost 11 or so years ago, Julian has been pursued by one force or another, and the people who were responsible for those killings have never been pursued. So this is a very important point, I think, that all of these revelations that Julian has brought to us, about all these wars, corruption, lies, our elected officials lying and all these things, there's little to no repercussions for them, but there are for Julian. Julian is the one who is suffering. Julian is the one who is imprisoned.
And can I interrupt you to add one thing to that? And nobody's journalism over the past 10 years has been under as fine a microscope as his, because you have the most powerful people and forces in the world looking for any slip up to take him down. There were extensive efforts to try to show that something he revealed had led to some type of death somewhere in Afghanistan or somewhere. Nothing. There were undoubtedly many efforts to get him to publish things that were untrue in an effort to discredit him. But like a good journalist does, he authenticated documents before he published them. To have a record over a decade plus that's that impeccable under that type of a microscope is an incredible journalistic achievement.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point that out, that Julian, he's the victim in this whole situation that John outlined from when he was under house arrest until now, his third year in prison. What we've been asking people to do across the country is get in touch with their representatives, and tell them how concerned they are about their democratic rights that are under threat through this prosecution of Julian Assange. That's what we've been sort of imploring people to do across the country, is to stand up for their democratic rights and their free press, and tell their representatives that they really care about their First Amendment, their free press, and so they want this prosecution dropped. Do you have a go?
Just in the positive, it's not a good phrase, but how do you go about redemption? So the burden of bad conscience that Washington has placed upon the people of the United States, this interests me because to alleviate that suffering is such an important thing. So those revelations 10 years ago, Iraq War, Afghan war files, the cables, the collateral murder video, the Guantanamo Bay detainee files, had seeped in to the consciousness of the people of the United States in a thin band. It's not, as you would expect, like holding knowledge in the head. It's a historical phenomenon, so it's hard for us to read. But we can read the results. They're out of Afghanistan. Guantanamo Bay closure is, well, on the cusp. People can't bear it anymore and understand that Washington put it in Guantanamo Bay because it wouldn't be covered by the decency of the laws of the United States. Its closure is imminent. They're out of Iraq and just have a few troops in Syria causing a little bit of trouble and discomfort, but they'll be out of there too. It's really important to understand that those leaks ended wars. In specific examples, I can give you the status of forces agreement between the United States and Iraq was refused by the Iraq government, and as a consequence, the troops of the United States and allies, my country, were withdrawn. Really important to understand that it's not a burden of consciousness upon the people of the United States when I say that this deluge of malice and insult, it's the responsibility of Washington, and as a consequence of it seeping through in the thin layer of historical phenomenon, they're gone, they're out, they're ended. Such an enormous empire takes a bit of turning around, but it has. I don't excuse Washington by this, my statements. What I intent is to alleviate a burden of consciousness that accusation places upon the United States, and accompanying that, the realization that the redemption has been and gone. It's there. All you have to do is partake of the understanding that the revelations have worked their course. Also, in my imagination, Chelsea Manning is a historical figure none less than Joan d'Arc, Joan of Arc. And as a treasure of the United States, her rise to the pantheon of gods will continue, in my view. Thank you.
Let's hope. Dr. West or Gabriel, anything else before we open it up for questions?
Well, I tell you, I was blessed to be at the trial of Sister Chelsea with Chris Hedges and others, and I would affirm what you said in terms of the unbelievable courage of Sister Chelsea. But let me say this about journalism. that we're living in a moment of such massive spiritual decay and moral decrepitude. By spiritual decay, I mean indifference toward the suffering of weak and vulnerable people. And by moral decrepitude, I mean the relative eclipse of integrity and honesty and decency. So when it comes to journalism, there is a dearth of quality journalism in the American empire. And there's a near death of genuine journalism. And what that means then is that you've got levels of careerism, opportunism, the cronyism between the owners of newspapers with the powers that be, so that truth-seeking and justice-bearing is an afterthought. And journalism is reduced to superficial PR relations and strategies and tactics that have little to do with the truth, because the condition of truth is to allow the suffering to speak of everybody, no matter what color, gender, sexual orientation, or nation. So when we hear the U.S. government bring critiques to bear on journalists in China, and China's authoritarian, journalists in Iraq, authoritarian, Haiti, authoritarian, and then come back to the States and can't say a mumbling word of support for the release of my dear brother Julian. And that's true for Chelsea. That's true for a whole host of whistleblowers. Then the hypocrisy and the inconsistency and the inconstancy comes to the surface. And that's why the Amy Goodmans, the Intercepts, the Black Power Media, the Black Agenda Report, WBAI, Brother Randy Credit Co., and the others make a difference. And this is no small talk, because in the end it becomes the very grounds upon which you lose any sense of your democracy, any sense of press freedom, any sense of individual liberty. And I come from a black folk in this belly of the American beast, whose history bears witness to that loss of liberties and democracies, while it is celebrating itself with forms of national idolatry as the misery continued day in and day out. And that's why Brother Julian and I talked about the legacy of Martin Luther King. We talked about the legacy of Ella Baker. We talked about the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer. And here he, all the way down from Australia, could open his heart and open his mind and say, lo and behold, Brother West, given whatever differences we have, we are committed to press freedom and democratic flourishing. And I said to him, my dear vanilla brother from Australia, I am in solidarity with you, because I'm committed to press freedom, individual liberty, democratic flourishing, and keeping tracks of the victims of the war crimes of the largest empire in the history of the species, called the American Empire.
Again, that's AssangeDefense.org. For anybody who needs to find out how to get involved or get any more information. We do have a little more time if there are any questions that anybody. Max?
Yeah, thanks Ryan and Cornel for showing up. It's really important that you all are here. I went to meet...
Actually, hold on 1 second so people on the stream can hear you.
Well, I just wanted to start out by thanking Ryan and Cornel for showing up, because when I met Gabriel and John on their first leg on their trip in D.C., we got a heckler here in the room.
Oh, a beautiful voice of a newcomer in time and space, and we are so glad that precious little one is in the world.
Yes, amen. Hopefully you can spend some quality time with her afterwards. But there was a lack of interest of the media in what I think is the trial of the century. And look at this room. I mean, I feel like Robert Byrd. Why is this chamber empty? Where's the press? I mean, look at the remarkable people on stage. Where's the press? Why is it up to us? Where's the press now that the case is totally fallen apart, when it's been revealed that the US government was basically rehabilitating a child molester, a diagnosed sociopath, and a liar to put together a failed case? Where was the press when files, text messages, emails came tumbling out of a Spanish court showing that CIA assets from UC Global had plotted to poison Julian Assange? Well, the press was reporting on Navalny in Russia, as you said. Whereas it was up to us at the Gray Zone to report on that incredible story. It should have been on the front page of the New York Times.
That's right.
That that CIA assets had stalked the partner of Julian Assange, that they had tried to steal the diaper of his child to prove it was his child, that they had robbed his legal counsel's office, that they had broken into the cameras in the embassy, that they had subverted the Ecuadorian security services to do so, that they had actually hacked into the devices of the Washington Post's national security correspondent, Ellen Nakashima, and she said nothing. Anthony Lowell Bergman, his devices were hacked in from NPR when he visited Assange. He said nothing. No one said anything. So I guess my question for Gabriel and John is on your ability to get any interest from the legacy press in this incredible case at a very momentous time when it's clearly fallen apart. And Cornel as well. I mean, you've been on Anderson Cooper a lot in the last year. I mean, have there been any requests to talk about this? And for Ryan, I mean, you're here, you're putting yourself out there, but Kevin Gustola said that the Intercept rejected his request to cover the trial in London of Julian Assange. And I don't believe the Intercept assigned anyone. I mean, you're the Washington bureau chief, it's not necessarily your fault, but the Intercept seems to have strayed from its original mission to take on the national security state in so many ways. So my question for you is, what is the Intercept planning to do to focus more on this crime, this huge violation of international law, but also this huge violation of press freedom? Because you have a platform that we don't have at the Gray Zone. You have resources that we don't have. So what are you all planning to do?
Do you guys want to go first?
Big thanks to you, Max. I mean, without a lot of your coverage, no one would know, like.
Thank you.
And I think, really in Julian's case, independent media has just, led the way. They've been really the tip of the spear with all of, all these dominoes that just keep dropping there, from the arbitrary detention decision in 2015 to Nils Melzer's torture decision to the Swedish allegations just evaporating, to the embassy spying, to the extradition rejection. Each stage of the way, the independent media has really led the way in the coverage, and I think what we're seeing now here is that it's having an effect. Like the independent media is seeping into the mainstream media, and they become it's this sort of shame effect, like Julian did, with the revelations through WikiLeaks. Like they could not report on it. So I think that's what we're seeing now, is that there's so much, independent media is growing so much stronger, and the mainstream media are going to have to figure out if they're going to catch up, basically.
Yeah, it's amazing when you walk in here, you see a sign, "Free Austin Tice," because he can be used as a pawn in the U.S. dirty war on Syria. There's no sign for Julian Assange. What does that say about the National Press Club and the whole Beltway culture?
No, it's a really good question. I'll take two parts of them. Kevin, as you know, I'm a fan of his journalism. He appeared on our podcast to talk about his coverage of the trial. We did assign somebody to it. You and I can talk about it later, the person ran into some serious health difficulties, and there were a lot of, and so that led to a lot of internal delays in the coverage, which did eventually run, but I would have liked to see us doing daily dispatches, treating it as a trial of the century type of event, just as a symbol and as a signal to the rest of the press that this is a trial of the century, that everything rests on this. And I've done a lot of questioning of why it is that, exactly, here we are in the National Press Club. Why are there not free Assange signs in the National Press Club? Why isn't there a drumbeat from the American press around this? And I have not been able to get beyond basic pathologizing. I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have on this. The kind of armchair psychoanalysis that Assange was such a dominant journalistic presence for the last generation, really. The number of stories that WikiLeaks broke that impacted the world that we've all forgotten about outnumber the number of consequential scoops that some of the best journalists will have in their entire careers. It's just a staggering record of achievement. So there may be some professional jealousy there and some wish to then salve that by saying, well, I didn't get beaten, because that's not actually journalism. I don't know what exactly it is, but it's something else. Because if it's journalism, then I've been getting my hat handed to me by this weirdo Australian out here with this website. So it can't be that. That just doesn't comport with my worldview and my understanding of myself. So then you start inventing rationalizations for that allow you to then separate him from your field, because you don't want him in your field. There might also be some thought of winning favor, with sources who are hostile to him by not speaking up, or losing favor by speaking up. I don't know if you're here at the time. We talked about some of the 2016 grievances that no doubt play into a kind of resistance-happy press, and I suspect the allegations that we talked about earlier, I think might have been before you got here, probably leave some people saying, you know what, I'm just not going to bother with this. And that's why Dr. West and I were talking earlier about the importance of pushing past any discomfort you have when a principle is at stake. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, because you understand the media as well as anybody. What is going on here? Because they're on the line too, eventually, whether they realize it or not.
Absolutely. I mean, but one of the consequences of living in a decadent empire is that the virus of cowardliness and hypocrisy is manifest in every sphere, including the professional managerial classes, including journalism, including the academy. I won't go into that right now. I was blessed to break bread with the great I.F. Stone. He was writing his book on Socrates. We talked week after week. I love my brother. And he told me, he said, journalism is experiencing, this is way back 30 years ago, is experiencing the captivity of the right-wing politicians and the neoliberal emerging politicians. The cronyism at the top of journalism is now accommodating itself to those politicians, which means that the painful truths that Brother Ryan is talking about, they're not interested in. It doesn't generate money, it doesn't generate revenues, doesn't generate profits. They say, ooh, that's crude. Well, sometimes a dose of vulgar Marxism is useful. Sometimes a dose of understanding class dynamics is very useful. It doesn't matter what color they are. They can be careerists, they can be opportunists, they can be cronyists, they can be nepotistic. That's part of it. So that the relative paucity of the courage, which is manifest in Julian Assange, is more and more a rare thing. The willingness to take a risk, manifest in Assange and Chelsea and others, more and more a rare thing. You see. So I think that's part of it. That's not the definitive explanation, but I do think that's part of it. And I think that's something that we have to acknowledge. And yet, at the same time, you know, these neoliberal politicians with all of their hypocrisy, it is a house of cards. It's going to fall. It's like sand. Sooner or later, these truths will be manifest. And it reminds me what Brother Randy Credico always reminds me. When the abolitionists came to Washington, D.C. in the 1840s, how many journalists did they have showing up? Theodore Parker, Lydia Maria Child, Frederick Douglass. How many showed up? It was a paucity. And they were talking about the possibility of a civil war if you don't come to terms with this catastrophe called white supremacist slavery. They said, oh, these journalists don't know what they're talking about. 15 years later, they got a movement. You got a whole different situation, only because we're talking about something that's real. We're talking about suffering of human beings. We're talking about structures and institutions that are deteriorating and therefore don't want to come to terms with the kind of questions you're asking, my brother. And so we shouldn't be discouraged. I'm not discouraged at all. Not at all. When I look in the sparkling eyes of that precious little one who's making those beautiful noises and say, we're going to fight for you. That's who Julian is also fighting for. The preciousness of this little one to live in a world in which liberty and democracy can flourish, and people are going to have to sacrifice in order to make sure that it's so.
Should I pass the mic over there?
Sure, sure.
By the way, I think the answer is Russiagate and the new McCarthyism is a big factor.
Yeah, well,
Until we challenge the Russiagate narrative, which unfortunately was validated by Democracy Now! And some people at the Intercept, we're not going to be able to rehabilitate Julian Assange's reputation in the mainstream press. Someone made the mistake of leaving.
Hi. We appreciate your voice, so brother.
I wanted to ask about, I mean, you know, Belmarsh is a dungeon. I visited Winston-Silcott there 30 years ago. It's a terrible place. Can you talk, please, about the conditions of Julian's, you know, confinement and, I mean, is he allowed, you know, how much contact does he have with outsiders? I mean, in person, is he allowed to get visits? And, you know, just and how's he doing, you know, like in himself, personally?
So, you know, as I'm not sure if you're aware, but Julian won his extradition case at the beginning of the year, January 4th, I think it was. The US DOJ immediately signalled they would appeal, and then a couple of days later, Julian's bail was rejected. So he's now in his third year of prison in Belmarsh. He's a remand prisoner. Belmarsh, if you've been there, you know it's it's full of the most violent criminals in the UK. It's not it's not a nice place. Last time I saw him was in October last year, and after I saw him, they shut down visits, and he wasn't able to get a visit for 8 months. So he had no contact with his family, lawyers, or friends or loved ones. No physical contact for 8 months. Luckily, last week he had his first visit with his family after 8 months. So yeah, I mean, you know, we're all very happy about that. He's suffering in there. You know, it's been years, and he is very strong, very courageous person. But after years of attacks, spending 23 hours a day in a small cell by yourself. It has an effect on someone, and that's what seeing him over the years, you can really see that the change in him, which is quite frightening to me. But yeah, sure, I'll pass it to you, John, if you want to say.
Thank you. Just a couple of... There's a bit of irony that Julian, a few months ago, got a permission to have a visit. The jail was in lockdown and then it was sort of lifted. So they allowed family visit. So the circumstances are there are very few prisoners in the room, and they cut down the time in order to accommodate a lot of it. So it was about 40 minutes. The children came in. The instructions from the guard were this: that should the children embrace you, Julian was in full PPE, by the way. Should the children embrace you, you'll have to spend 2 weeks in isolation. Should Stella embrace you, you'll have to spend 2 weeks in isolation. It's a bit mad, isn't it? He's already 23 hours a day in isolation. But Nils Melzer, who went there, you know, and he's brave and brainy. He's characterised this as before our eyes a slow motion murder. Now, I use those dramatic terms to make the point so that it's not reduced to the ordinariness. These people deliberately, consciously, constantly, continuously, ceaselessly think of ways. So when they visited last week, the guard attempted to stick his finger in the little boy's mouth. I don't know, tricked for drugs or something. The little boy is just over 2 years of age. Of course the boy went to meltdown. His father has to sit there in the chair, otherwise be brought low and the visit's finished. What I mean by brought low is they bundle on. If you go against the rules, they bundle on. 6 of them push you down, put the handcuffs on, throw you out through the door. He has to sit there, watch his child go into meltdown as a guard tries to stick his finger in his mouth, in the little boy's mouth. That's the circumstance. I won't make it easy for you. That would be a pleasure and an end for the Crown Prosecuting Service, the Department of Justice, and certain disgruntled, miserable elements of the State Department, and certain probably vicious would be appropriate word, members of the CIA who hate it when their authority and the finality of their authority is evaded. It upsets their guts, burns, because they exercise the power of life and death over many people every day. So that's the circumstances. Forgive me, I can't make it easy for you. They would be delighted if his end came now.
Hi, I have a question that I feel like it's one of the most important aspects of the case that isn't talked about enough. I know Randy did on one of the episodes of Assange Countdown to Freedom, talked to Ben Weisner about it.
Close.
Okay, but the global precedent that this case sets with having a non-U.S. citizen charged with breaking U.S. law is, I mean, why is there not more focus on that? What if China says, hey, this U.S. journalist broke our laws, send them over. Are we going to do that? So I feel like maybe I don't know, I just wish there were more, you don't hear that much talk about that. And I think that could maybe break through to some people that are still, hung up on the 2016 election and Julian as a person, is to see exactly how big this case is and that dangerous global precedent.
I'm pessimistic that it could break through, but I'd love to hear. Yes, so the question was what on earth is going on with an Australian being accused of treason in the United States, basically? And what precedent does that set around the world? Am I right now breaking laws in Azerbaijan or China or Peru by what I'm reporting? And can I then be extradited to one of those countries? Which is not an idle concern when the global regime for extradition is controlled by countries, by the United Arab Emirates, by others who what are they? My brain is broken. What's that? Then they put out a notice and Interpol, right? Interpol. I think that the UAE owns like half of the Interpol Foundation, or invests in half the Interpol Foundation. So, what if the UAE says I violated some of their journalism laws, which I no doubt I have. So the next time that I fly through a country where somebody from Interpol could pick me up and send me to the UAE to face charges for a crime that they say I committed in their country, even though I was not even in their country. It's true that he released the evidence of the war crime right in this room, but otherwise he has spent very little time in the United States. Am I right, Gabriel?
Yeah, no, hasn't spent much time here at all. Yeah.
Right. And so when you've spoken to attorneys, why hasn't that been a bigger point? That press freedoms aside, what are you doing here? This isn't an American citizen, and this wasn't a crime that happened on American soil, and it's not a crime, period. But you know what I mean. What have your attorneys said about that odd part of this case? Sure.
The William Barr, under the first Bush administration, had the nickname the Snatcher because of his capacity to manipulate extradition treaties for the judicial abduction into the United States of those people that the United States so determined would necessary to come here for whatever reason. Over the last 10 years, the treaties between the United States and whomever was willing have been rewritten to the advantage of the United States. In particular, my country has less restrictions on extradition to the United States than the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, at least, has not for political purposes and not if a death penalty is involved. So it's a policy of Washington to be able to judicially abduct whomever it wants to bring to the United States. Ola Bini, an AI expert, Meng Wanzhou from Huawei, CEO of Huawei, who's under threat of extradition into the United States from Canada. There are many, many, many. I can't remember them all. Somebody the other day I met at in Minneapolis had a list of them, extraordinary list. There's one just happened last week. The man was on an aeroplane. The aeroplane was diverted upon request of the United States and an extradition order lodged in a third country. He's dying of cancer in a jail in a third country, not his country. He was on the plane was diverted. It's a technique, a tool, a policy. I seem to say depressing things all the time.
I think we have time for one more, if anybody has another question. Dan?
John, you mentioned, I believe, that the Biden administration gave you a message, or someone told you that they wanted you to wait until after the inauguration to begin a pressure campaign. And I hope that you could elaborate a little on who told you that and what they told you and what kind of communication you may still have.
We don't. our communication was through the Human Rights Division. At that time in January, there wasn't, the inauguration hadn't happened, so it was the potential team. After that, we changed our tact, and rather than move, I found that approaching politicians with Julian's matter, they will take a position which fits in with the current, what they imagine policies or what the current atmosphere of government is, and then it's very hard work to change their mind. So the best thing we evaluated, Gabriel and myself, was to approach staffers and to approach people and get the assistance of the people to approach staffers and continue to approach staffers, because the staffers are the people who formulate and draw in the ideas to put to their political masters. So I think that is also, we decided in evaluation came to the view that we were building something. We were not, so that the mental construct of coming to the United States and approaching the administration and saying, well, what about Julian, was a falsity. First you had to come here and build support, and then come again and build support, and finally you might be able to do something. Also taking advantage of the unfolding of time, because the world is in a parlous state at the moment. There's a lot of tensions around, and as we saw last week with Thordarson's revelations, changes are coming quite rapidly, so being able to skate or utilise those changes was very, very important. Another thing is that Merrick Garland is manifesting an interest in changing the perception and actions of the Department of Justice. He had a meeting with the executives of the Washington Post and the New York Times over the 4 journalists that were under investigation by the department. Also, the USA Today had a subpoena against it for the IP addresses of those people who had gone online to the USA Today and looked at a particular video. That subpoena has been withdrawn. The Supreme Court over the CFAA, the Computer Fraud Act, made a decision that the interpretation of the Act was far too broad, which assists us because one of the cooked up charges against Julian, it was a broad interpretation against that. So the nature of things are changing, and consequently we want to be able to have a decision loop, an OODA loop, I think it's called in America, from Colonel Byrd, who's a well-known, world-famous military strategist, to be able to make the decisions very quickly, appropriate to the unfolding of information as the times produce new ideas and new elements constantly. As you see with the Biden-Putin meeting, everybody was relieved that the strategic stability was discussed, and then now there's 30 ships in the Black Sea on an exercise which has reintroduced tensions. So we have to be adroit. It's the longest answer I've ever made, so good. Sorry.
And I just wanted to say that we have just been so blessed and graced by the presence of Brother Gabriel and Brother John on behalf of our dear brother Julian to come to the United States and to bear witness with such integrity, such quality, such eloquence. And we want you to know that we know that there's fellow citizens in the midst of this empire. There's fellow human beings in this country who are in solidarity with you, with your son and your brother. And that no matter what you see at the top, that there are those of us, there's a whole wave of us who will be resilient, who will be resisting, and who will fight in the name of principle, as Brother Ryan says. And here's a brother from rural Maryland, Frederick Douglass country, who was in solidarity in the way in which so many of us in this room and outside of this room are. And you need to know that as you make your way back. And we bid you a safe trip. Farewell, but no goodbyes, because we are in this struggle together all the way down.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, John. Thank you for, I know what you're doing is for Julian, but thank you too for what you're doing for the press. And thank you all for coming out here today at AssangeDefense.org to find out more.
Thank Brother Nathan for facilitating this in so
Yeah,
many
thanks.
ways. Yeah, thank you, Brother Nathan.
Just thank Cornel.
Yeah, I should thank Cornel and Ryan. Amazing. You know, it's just great to see you guys, and thanks for coming out and helping us with
That was
this.
an honor.
It's- Yeah, thank you.
Honor and blessing for